Gender studies is a political theory course. Actually, what it really is
a religion.
Intersectionality, postmodernism, critical theory, queer theory, it's all even fat studies. Actually, to be a poor straight white man prevented from advancing the corporation, that's genuine bullshit. Like when someone duct tapes a banana to a wall and says, oh, this is $1 million, or someone defecates in a bucket and says, like, this is glorious art. Female genital mutilation is a barbaric practice. We have a lot of problems here in America, so I don't, you shouldn't say those type of things or whatever. Who am I, as a Western white neocolonial male, to say that another culture's practices are inferior to mine? Truth is a function of who has the power. Do I seek conflict? Yes, definitely, to some degree.
I just don't really relate to gender that much.
Every single day I walked into, the clown show. You can never make blanket statements about anyone based on gender studies. It's pretty much you can get there like 95% of the time.
Then come out that the other side and genuinely feeling like I have spread some harmful ideas. I feel so duped by gender studies.
If you're going to go to college, don't waste your money by getting a X degree, and it's usually gender studies.
Okay, hello, Paul. You're welcome. Would you believe you are the first straight white man to be on my channel?
Nice. Happy to be breaking through the glass ceiling. It has held me back my whole life. Yeah.
So I'm very intrigued about your perspective. But before we start, I'd love to just introduce you. If you could let everyone know who you are, what led you to making the content you make, and what are the kind of things that you talk about on your channel?
Yeah, my mission, I guess, is to make enlightened centrism great again. That's my tagline, or at least the one I'm trying to give cachet to. There is this meme online that if you criticize both the far left and the far right, then you are this enlightened centrist or whatever who just, you hover above. And it's like, there's this term both sidesing, which I think is the dumbest term I've ever heard in my life, because it implies that if you identify a problem on either side of a conflict, then that's inherently bad. And there are obviously times where, one side can be in the right and the other is not. But I think the biggest problem nowadays is extremism on the far left and on the far right. So I'd say the goal of my channel is to bring to wage a meme war on behalf of the Enlightened Center. So I like going after the far left and far right. And and as far as what started it, it was during the Black Lives Matter riots. I had friends posting all kinds of crazy shit on Facebook and whatnot, and so I had posted some stuff and then gotten arguments in the comment section of a Facebook post, which I was like, this is the most unproductive waste of anyone's time. So I figured I'd put...
So you posted stuff disagreeing with some of the rhetoric?
At a certain point, a police officer, a black police officer named David Dorn, was killed at a few weeks into the riots. And so I said, if this is what the riots are leading up to, then these have to stop. This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I got all these comments from people saying, like, actually, Paul, you're a racist because you're choosing to focus on the violence, right? This is a historic, civil, glorious movement, and any criticism at all, you're choosing to focus on the negative parts. So actually, you're the racist for getting upset that a black police officer was shot in the street, and that just nobody seemed to care. I was like, you know what? I'm not going to argue in the Facebook comments. I'm going to post some videos. And so the initial videos that I posted were targeted towards like people I knew, from like Facebook or whatever in high school and all that. And then it expanded into more of my creative interests because I've always been interested in philosophy, politics, Roman Empire type stuff, undiagnosed autist stuff. So, and then it just grew from there. So yeah, that's the origin of my role in the great meme wars to come.
Mm-hmm. And so you've been making YouTube content since?
Yeah, 3 years now. 3 years, 3.5 almost. Yeah, and I initially posted just videos, just like talking about Black Lives Matter, talking about other kind of just basic concepts, or not basic concepts, but things that everyone who, whether or not you paid attention to politics, you were aware of. And then, but my creative interests narrowed on Jordan Peterson. I've always, or in college, I was significantly influenced by Hair Doctor, as my good friend JJ McCullough likes to call him. But so then my channel kind of went down a bit of a niche, taking Jordan Peterson's more complex philosophy and trying to distill it down to a simpler way of communicating it. And then it's just evolved into whatever it is now. League videos, League of Legends and politics intersections, a queer deconstruction of queer theory, and all kinds of fun stuff. So
what was it like for you, when you started with those videos, in terms of, did you feel like you had to be brave to put this out there? Like, did you have fears? And particularly with then moving on to your comments about queer theory and LGBT matters, I can imagine there's some feelings that come up there when you are quote unquote straight white male and you're kind of having your foot in this game.
Yes, well, definitely. So at first, I would say I've never been afraid of saying what my opinion is, because whether it's correct or not, I believe that I say things that the overwhelming majority of reasonable people would agree with. The only people that really have a problem with me are people who only see a very specific, maybe perhaps over sensationalized bit of comedy that they don't realize is comedy, or people who are just completely ideologically possessed on either side. So I never had a fear of, I'm putting my opinions out there and I might get canceled or piss people off. I did have a fear of just judgment of like, I never thought I would make videos. I was like, I guess I was kind of the funny guy in, middle school and high school and all that. And in college, I learned to communicate a little bit better, but I would say it was fear of judgment primarily. Just, what is this guy doing? Not like, oh, he's saying the wrong things. This is cringe.
Yeah.
But I got over that after just a couple times doing it, because it's just like, oh, well, whatever. I'm already 4 videos in. If people think I'm cringe, it's already happened. I got nothing to worry about now.
It's happened by now.
And then as far as like LGBT issues, no, again, I genuinely do not believe that saying that because you're a certain identity, you can't talk on certain issues. I just don't think that's convincing, independent of whether or not I think it's like morally right. I just am confident that that's not convincing. So I never really felt like that was a barrier of any kind. Plus I have a minor degree in gender studies. So technically, the joke I like to make to my female friends is, technically I'm more qualified in women's issues than you are. So if you guys have any questions, let me know.
It's a good way to put it. I think I totally agree with you, and props to you for having the guts to talk about that stuff, because I think in a twisted way now you are of the demographic that is of a unique type of oppression, where suddenly your opinions seem to have the lowest standing amongst a certain group of people. And I can speak for, I've talked a lot about my experience in the quote unquote queer community in London, which is where I live, and how, the patriarchy and straight white men are just demonized in these people, and the way they speak about them, it's like they're not even thinking. And it's really how we are conditioned to be able to like dehumanize people. And they just think, because it's that kind of person, then it's impossible to dehumanize them. But I feel that's how we dehumanize people, because we think it's not possible.
Yeah. With the capacity to otherize is just, that's like built into our DNA. That's just basic tribalism, right? I would say it is interesting. Like, as well, is the straight white male the new oppressed class? It is interesting. I worked for companies where I was told, a lot of corporations, particularly in the United States, I don't know how it is in England. I would assume it's somewhat similar, but there are metrics that there are requirements for corporations to hire a certain number of people to meet diversity goals, not quotas, because I was told quotas are illegal, but goals are okay. So if you say, I want my company to resemble the communities we serve, that's the politically correct way of putting it. That means I want, if I'm in a community that's 50% non-white, then I want 50% of my workforce to be non-white. And I was in meetings. I was part of the DEI program design team, because as soon as an email got sent out saying, we're starting a DEI program design team if anyone wants to join, I said, sign me up. All right. I want to make sure this ship doesn't run into an iceberg.
Going undercover.
Yeah. Well, but I was very clear with my beliefs and perspectives. And, but I was told at one point that people would be offered different compensation levels based on whether or not they met diversity goals, which meant that literally while I was on that DEI program design team, helping, do whatever, come up with interview questions or some bullshit that was all nonsense anyway. I was in theory making it more difficult for me to get a promotion or whatever to move forward. And I quit my job. I would say 33% for that reason.
Yeah.
So I personally do not regard myself as oppressed along that dimension, but I'm also not going to ignore the fact that if I was not like privileged in other ways, just from from my dad growing up poor and then doing well and allowing me to have the very privileged life that I did have, like actually to be a poor straight white man with who like and then actually being prevented from advancing the corporation, that's genuine bullshit in my opinion.
Yeah.
Um, so yes.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, especially if this person has come from, abuse, like a difficult childhood and worked their ass off to get to where they are, and then they simply don't get a job because they are not of that minority status. So before we dig into gender studies, because I'm very intrigued to know, just you mentioned centrism, obviously, and I guess if I had to describe myself, if I had to, I would probably use that word, or moderate, or, that I can see elements from both sides. But how would you describe centrism and what does it mean to you?
Conservative on some issues and progressive on some issues, depending on what makes sense. I mean, that's the simplest possible way to put it. And it's all relative. Conservative and progressive, or left and right, I mean, are relative terms. It's like left of what and right of what. So if we're talking about social issues, well, I would have been left wing 5-10 years ago. But
Mm-hmm.
if being left wing on social issues means it's a modern civil rights issue to ensure that biological males compete with biological females in sports, well, then I'm not left wing. So now what am I, conservative on that? It's like, I think that's a
Yeah.
stupid way to put it. But my particular brand, or again, the meme that I'm trying to force through the front lines of the meme war, is enlightened centrism, which is it's specifically trying to kind of, it's snarky, take it back, like, oh, you're going to call me an enlightened centrist? Like, yes, I in fact do have the correct opinions on every issue, if that's the case. If all I have to do is say, well, the far left are wrong, and here's why, on whatever issue, and the far right are wrong on whatever issue, well then fine, I will be an enlightened centrist if you want to call me that. So that's how
Mm.
the arch enemy of the enlightened centrist, in my opinion, is the moderate, the status quo moderate, meaning
Yeah. So by that, you mean someone who's not necessarily brave enough to think critically themselves and disagree with whatever is right for them, but sort of going along with what everyone around them is thinking?
yeah. Well, yes, that would be a major element. And then also just, it's not about like, it's like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell and Joe Biden in a lot of ways. Like people who cannot see, someone who is in the center, who's not far left or not far right, but refuses to see the scope of the problems that we face as a society. We're like, oh, well, we just need to, adjust our tax rates a little bit more and we'll be fine. It's like, well, we also have the advent of social media and artificial intelligence that's destroying the minds of an entire generation. It's a little bit more than just, let's adjust our
Speaking the
tax
taxes.
rates here. Yeah. So I like the radical centrist. Again, it's all words. It's all just terms and definitions, and ultimately,
Yeah.
it's whatever is best at communicating what I'm trying to communicate. But
You mentioned the far left and the far right. So in a quick summary, what would you describe as kind of the biggest issue on each side? Maybe that's a very large question, but
I would say the fundamental divide on the far left, it's a question about truth and philosophy, and it's it's a question about truth, because depending on what your epistemology is the philosophy of truth. What is true? How do you know what's true or not? Depending on where you fall on that, all of your political opinions and all of your opinions on everything will grow out of that. And on the far left, they have the mentality that all of our norms and everything that we believe is true, every time you make a statement like murder is bad, or this art is good, that's all a social construction. That the only reason we believe those things is because people in power conditioned us to believe those things in order to reinforce their power. So that would be the left wing fundamental problem. The right wing fundamental problem is the opposite, which is there's only one truth and we know it, and it's in the Bible. And it's not just in the Bible, it's in our specific interpretation of the Bible or whatever religious text. So that's the simplest way I would
Yeah.
divide it. I can go into more detail, but I don't know.
And so do you always tie far right with religion?
Yeah, it's hard for me. Yes. Well, no, well, that's a good question. It's hard for me to conceptualize ultra conservatism that is absent a fundamentalist religious perspective. Can you think of any examples of how that might play out?
I'm definitely not as like equipped with a lot of the knowledge you possess on politics, but I mean, when we talk of, I'm going to say something really stupid here. When we talk of the Nazis and Hitler, I would think of him in my head as far right. But was that coming from?
But not super religious.
Yeah, like
Yeah. So the other, yeah. So white, like white or like ethno supremacy.
I mean, I guess he was anti-Jewish, so that's religion.
Yeah. Well, and so actually that's a good point. So you can and I've noticed this with the far right figures. They're actually like when you get the hardcore white ethno state people, like, you know, white men, uber alles or whatever, they're actually not even they actually, a lot of them associate with Christianity, like the KKK was Christian, right? Or allegedly.
Right.
There's a strain of that white supremacism, that far right ethno supremacy that actually appeals to like pagan, like Odin and the Norse gods and all that. And Hitler actually made a lot of usage of that type of stuff. So I think like his appeals were to what I would consider religious. Now I'm what would you say, former fan of Jordan Peterson, although I've been heavily influenced. I'm a Maps of Meaning super fan. I like his books, but I don't like his Twitter. So I perhaps have a definition of religion that is not what everyone else uses. But I regard all of those appeals to like we are the chosen people, we're the German people. That's as much of a religious claim as, you know, we are servants of God or we are whatever.
Yeah, and it's almost like, you know, for this far right, it is thinking about God, whereas far left, it's sort of postmodernist is their religion.
Yeah, they're both, there's fundamentalists on both sides. And
Yeah.
The Foucault postmodernists. I mean, the best way I would describe the postmodern or the far left pathology is like it's postmodern art. Like, you know, like when someone duct tapes a banana to a wall and it's like, oh, this is $1 million, or someone defecates in a bucket and says like, this is glorious art, and people stand around and take pictures and shit. It's like the reason that's called postmodern art is because of the philosophy of postmodernism, the message that it's trying to convey, which is that the statue of David or Beethoven's Fifth or whatever your favorite song is, J. Cole, Red Hot Chili Peppers, whatever, that the only reason you believe that is art that has high value is because your society told you that has value. When in reality, even this bucket that I defecate in fundamentally has the same artistic value as whatever, the Mona Lisa.
Yeah.
It's a very good illustration of postmodern philosophy and the message that it believes. And a lot of the far left pathology is postmodern in nature, and certainly in gender studies.
Yeah, and it's all anti-biology because, oh no, it could never be that there's something innate about my biology that finds a certain thing visually pleasing or a certain music moving.
Because biology is done by biologists, and biologists are part of the scientific hegemony that, you know, well, if they can get people to believe their research and hold themselves as experts, then that gives them power, which then they can use to maintain their status or whatever. It's just,
it's just ultra conspiracy theory. I think that's probably a good point then to move on to this. So gender studies, where shall we start? So tell me, how did you come to study that? And let's take it from there.
Yeah, it was sophomore year. I was 19 or 20, and it was Donald Trump got elected in November. And I was like, okay, well, I love talking about politics. Can't wait to talk about this very historic election at my liberal arts university. Like, of all the places I would expect we can talk about this. And I was in business school, and we never mentioned it once, except, you know, we got the day off to grieve or whatever because it was so traumatic. So I was like, okay, well, I would like to take a class where this type of stuff is discussed, like actually. So I took a gender, race, and law class, and it was pretty good. And then the reason I got the minor was because there was practical reasons. One, I thought that would just be funny to have. My major's in supply chain management, and that's roughly what I do now and have done for the past few years. But to pair that with a minor in gender studies, it's a very, very good happy hour talking point.
Be intrigued to see how you merge those two disciplines together.
Yeah, there's not much intersection, fortunately. There was also the practical element of it was mainly a practical decision. It wasn't like I love what's going on in gender studies, because you're not if you major in business, you can't minor in another business degree. So I couldn't get like some other finance degree or something like that. And I had already taken the 400 level class for gender studies, and it was very easy. So I was like, all right, well, I just have to take a few more classes and get it.
Okay.
So that's why I did. And it was actually before I had even encountered Jordan Peterson, because I encountered Jordan Peterson my junior year. So I didn't even have like these, I didn't have he lays out a lot more of the philosophical explanation of what's going on in a field like gender studies with like Michel Foucault and postmodernism and all this nonsense. I wasn't aware of that at the time, but it's absolutely the case that there's a lot of that there, and there's some.
So you went into it kind of knowingly, with the intention that you knew there would be a lot of bullshit going on, or
yeah, just because that was like, oh, you didn't get a gender studies degree, like, that's the archetypal, like, if you're going to go to college, don't waste your money by getting a X degree, and it's usually gender studies. So I knew that, but I was also like, I'm very interested in hearing what people I strongly disagree with have to say. So
I think that impresses me as a 19-year-old version of you, because especially when you're that age, the concept of actively placing yourself in a room full of people who are going to disagree with you is, I don't think you find people like that very often. What is it about you that kind of gave you that motivation?
I mean, as you asked that, I was asking myself, do I seek conflict? Like, yes, definitely to some degree. I seek conflict on things that no, because contrarian just takes the opposite point just for the hell of it, which I will do sometimes, but I wouldn't define myself that way. I mean, like, one of the fundamental things that, and I've talked about this on my channel multiple times, is like, I came from a household that had a ton of conflict. So my mom and dad would fight all the time for years, and that was the environment I grew up in, and I was the mediator. So it was like, it's built into my mind, going back to the enlightened centrism of like, well, don't both sides a thing here. It's like, I watched for 20 years or 18 years or whatever, like 20 years, the arguments between my parents. I would hear the argument that actually played out, and then I would hear my mom's perspective and my dad's perspective, and I would go, you're both fucking wrong, because you both poked at each other or whatever, did something to cause the fight. So I guess I believe I am naturally wired to, okay, how can I see something from this person's perspective and this person's perspective and my own, or something like that. So that's probably the biggest psychological driver that pushes a lot of this.
Very, very interesting you say that. I mean, from children of trauma or adverse childhood experiences, which I relate to a lot, but you can go down different roads, right? And there will always be positives to be gained from that, because of the kind of defense mechanisms as a child, you just sort of these coping mechanisms. So I think that's obviously a pro, something good to come out of it for you.
Yes, among the many. It took several months of therapy, and I still deal with other issues, but certainly I think the big, in your mid-20s, at least for me, is when there's a point when you step back and realize your parents are people who ultimately, on the big questions in life, know as much as you do, and are as ignorant as you in a lot of ways. And that's when I kind of stepped back and was like, okay, let's, instead of, okay, well, I came from a house that was very conflict based, so I can blame my problems on them, versus like, well, maybe not blame, but like, understand how that's impacted me. Look at the bright sides, because I can complain about my childhood, but then I'm like, oh, well, if I was my dad, I probably would have turned out way worse given his childhood. So, there's all kinds of, as you get older, cliches become more and more truth of like, oh, it's just, it's family trauma, or you figure, you're just unlearning generational trauma, whatever. It's like, I do think that's actually probably the fundamental human condition. So I feel bad for all the losers with healthy parent, relationships and all that stuff.
I feel like that, there's always something. Very mature stance to take, of course. So what is gender studies? And What do you expect to gain from this course?
Gender studies is a political theory course. Actually, what it really is a religion. And I mean it in it's functionally equivalent to a religion. So did you grow up religious at all?
Yes. So I was raised
Okay.
Catholic, not strictly, but yeah,
Okay. Did
I
you ever
kind
go to
of,
like church camps and do Sunday school and all that?
I went to church, never anything more
Okay.
than that.
I was big into church. I went to church camps and, we'd sit around a circle and Paul, what's on your mind? Like, praise God, da da da. This stuff. Not like super crazy stuff, but stuff like that. And it's exactly the same in a gender studies class where it's a testimonial nature. It's not about, it is, and it does depend on the class, but the majority of them are designed to, it's like if you go to Sunday school, they might ask you questions like, well, think like, why is there evil in the world? Or why are certain people the way that they are? And it seems like it's a real question, but they have a religion. So they're, just pointing you towards whatever direction you want to get to.
Morals, yeah.
And so the claims, the fundamental claims of gender studies, the fundamental theory in gender studies, I think you could say is intersectionality, which I suspect you and your audience are probably familiar with.
Oh yes, I'm
But
very intersectional.
yes, right. I am only mildly intersectional. I have a peanut allergy, so I'm technically disabled. So you're able-bodied and I'm not. So that's my
Well,
intersectional points.
how are you assuming I'm able-bodied?
That's
You
true.
are actually incorrect, but I just
That
said
was
it because
impressive.
how can you assume my gender? I keep forgetting to do this because I'm sort of new to podcasting, but for the sake of anyone listening that doesn't know, what is intersectionality?
Uh, intersectionality is a what's the best way to describe it for someone who hasn't heard it before? It's a tool. It's a tool for looking at the world, sort of like libertarianism. Like, what is libertarianism? Well, it's a set of ideas about how the world is and then how you should act in the world. Like, libertarianism says freedom is the most important thing, and these are the ways that we maximize freedom. Intersectionality, the fundamental claim is society is made up of interlocking systems of power. That's why it's intersectionality. So I'll give you the academic version that I explained at the CJDX. So intersectionality. Imagine you're a person at the center of the, you're a dot, okay, and then you have like a spectrum, right? Um, there's many different ways that you can fall along the spectrum, and this spectrum we'll start with is class, right? So you can be proletariat or bourgeoisie. You can be poor or rich, right? And you fall somewhere along that spectrum. So everyone falls somewhere along the spectrum of poor and rich. Okay, that's one spectrum. That was the original critical theory, critical Marxist theory, where a lot of these gender studies ideas comes out of. That's the original, what would you call it, dimension of identity here, is poor and rich. Okay, so that's one dimension. But then there's another dimension. You could be white or black, and rich is obviously superior. Rich has more power than poor, right? And white has more power than black in a traditional racist society. So it's not enough to say, well, are you rich or are you poor? You also have to say, are you rich, are you poor, and are you white, and are you black? So now you take into account, well, are you rich, rich and poor along this identity? And then you take out, are you white or black along this identity? Then you add another dimension, gay or straight. Then you add another dimension, able-bodied or disabled. And every single dimension, there's a dominant identity and a subordinate identity. There's a powerful identity and a non-powerful identity. And so intersectionality is saying for every individual, you look at, where along these dimensions does each person fall? And then they don't say this explicitly, but their theory is, well, if you take those into account, you can better understand how being rich and black is still, bad compared to being poor and white, which is absurd as fuck.
Yeah.
But that's how they justify those claims like that, and how you can be a rich black celebrity and still, racism is a bigger problem for you than being poor is for, some poor white person. So so intersectionality is saying we look at basically 5 or 6 dimensions of identity: race, gender, sexuality, able-bodiedness, class, maybe a few more, like, indigenous status or something like that. And then those are the only ones that matter, essentially.
Yeah.
And that's obviously problematic because, and I actually wrote, this was one of my papers, not thesis. I didn't write a thesis, but one of my main papers criticizing intersectionality was it doesn't take into account experiential oppression. Like, let's say you're a straight white rich male, blah blah blah, whatever. It's like, okay, well, what if you were abused as a child, or what if your parent passed away when you were young? It's like there's literally a million, or what if you were bullied, very badly when you were? There's literally a million ways in which your experience can affect who you are, independent of your physical character or whatever your identity is.
Yeah.
Along those classic canonical dimensions that are not taken into account. And so intersectionality is to steel man it, it's basically saying like, we need to take into account how, like, okay, well, if you might be up in the 60s, it certainly was the case. You might have some money as like a black person, but if you still had to go to the segregated water fountain, it's like, okay, that's a real problem. So, it tries to look at those situations and take more nuance into account. The irony is that, it's just a hobbled form of individualism. Like, what's the ultimate form of intersectionality? Take every single dimension into account. Not just your race, but your sibling status, your immigration status, what your childhood was like, what your relationship with your parents was, what your relationship with your friends were, Like, you take all that into account, you get the individual, which is sort of what our whole society was kind of pushing for, but that's changed in the last few years.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would describe it as like a very basic scorecard of oppression for dummies. So simple tick box exercise on, which of these boxes do you fit in? Therefore, you deserve more than that person. And I do think, kind of initially, if you're still fighting for lots of different causes, then it's good to kind of recognize, okay, this person has kind of been dealing with two different kinds of oppression, but I just feel like in the West now, I feel, it does a lot more damage than good. It's certainly quite regressive. So how does it relate to gender studies then?
So gender studies it's called gender studies, but it's, like, you could not talk about any issue without also bringing up race, without also bringing up class. So, right. I'm quite sure that gender studies and like African American studies and even fat studies, to the degree that I don't know if they had that at the school I went to, but I'm sure that's a degree now.
So I'm so surprised that's a thing.
Yeah, well, I'm pretty sure you would basically get the same basic, it would overlap a great deal. There might be, specific stuff that's more esoteric, whichever one you pick, but it's all the same kind of thing. Like, what's there's different types of medicine, right? You might go into like oncology versus neurosurgery or whatever, but like everyone gets a basic idea of basic health and how the body works. So it's all of those studies, gender studies, queer studies, the grievance studies you call them. They all go back to intersectionality, postmodernism, and critical theory. It's all this. Those are all more or less getting at the same things. The problem with all of this stuff, once you get into the academic stuff, is it's purposely meant to be inaccessible to people. And purposely might be the wrong word, but that's just where the incentive structure lies, where it's like, well, if intersectionality and postmodernism can be understood by not even the majority of people, but like a significant minority of people, well, then it eliminates our power as academics, contributing absolutely nothing to the scholarship. Like if you take an intro to philosophy class, like one of the most basic things they'll talk about is continental versus analytic philosophy. It's like philosophy 101, the history of philosophy. And I don't even fully understand it. There are people who say that distinction is nonsense, right? So like you can't even begin to talk about the most basics of anything having to do with philosophy without some people saying that's not true, that's not true, that's not true, which is completely different for like math, because you just obviously point out like, well, 2 + 2 is 4, and 2 times 2 is 4, and da-da-da. And it builds up from first principles. Philosophy, it's like, so there will be people who, can say, well, technically postmodernism is this and postmodernism is that. And like, there's nuance there. But as far as people watching need to understand, it's intersectionality, postmodernism, critical theory, queer theory. It's all different ways to describe the same fundamental issue at hand, which goes back to the truth is a function of who has the power, right? That's kind of the fundamental commonality.
So would that be your description of postmodernism?
Yeah, in the way that I criticize it. It's like saying, what's Christianity? It's like, well, Christianity is the belief that Jesus rose from the dead. It's like, well, yes, it's more than that, because there's like specific rituals and all that stuff. So like as soon as you take a word like Christianity, you can explore it to any level of analysis, right? So postmodernism, you can explore it to any level of analysis. But if we're talking about like fundamentalist Christianity, you can be a little bit more reductive. You don't have to be an expert on Christianity to criticize fundamental Christianity, right? I don't believe you have to have read the Bible to point out why fundamentalist Christians are wrong. The same thing with postmodernism and far left academic theory. It's like, well, you know, you can't criticize it till you know all these things. And it's like, well, first off, in my case, I do actually happen to I wrote papers on these things, and it's funny to see people's eyes kind of glaze over when it's like, oh, this guy actually talking about Sylvia Rivera and the Stonewall riots, and he knows what that is, and that kind of is harming us. That was we were hoping on it obfuscating things, but yeah, all that stuff. It's like and like, but to the average person who's just concerned about the extremism coming out of those fields, the fundamental thing you need to know is that they believe that what is true and what is moral is relative. It's socially constructed, and it's a function of whoever has power. And all of the norms that you and I operate by, like, hey, we shouldn't, cut off the breasts of 13-year-old girls who believe they're the opposite sex. Like, whoa, the only reason we believe that is because we live in a patriarchy that, has these very binary categories of sex, and the distinction between adult and the child is arbitrary as well. It's like,
I've heard of that.
That's Foucault's philosophy pushed to its extreme limits.
Yeah.
And again, in my mind, you don't have to be a postmodern philosopher to say that's fucking bullshit. And there's no scenario where we're going to accept that. And I'm going to put my foot down, and I'm not going to sit here and explain it like a fucking nerd about, well, technically the reason that we shouldn't, get rid of the distinction between a child and adult is, it's like, no, sometimes there's some things that you just have to say, fuck you. We're not debating this. And that's that.
Well said.
And that's how I feel about gender.
Well, you mentioned queer theory, so I'm curious. Would you see gender studies as kind of a subset of queer theory, or are they just both kind of separate types of critical thinking? How would you describe queer theory, I guess, for anyone listening?
Yeah, queer theory would be the idea that I'm trying to think of the relevance to connecting it back to. Well, queer theory is the idea that being queer is inherently a good thing, and not queer as in like as in gay or whatever. Queer meaning that, and they have that dichotomy. It's the normal and the queer.
Yeah.
Right. So queer, and they mean that like in a deep philosophical way. Like there are the norms of society, then there's the queering of those norms, and to be queer is to engage in revolutionary opposition towards these oppressive, patriarchal, racist norms, etc. Right?
Yeah.
So queer theory is the idea that the rejection of societal norms is inherently a good thing because those societal norms are inherently oppressive. And the queer theory perspective, again, you're not going to find a self-described queer theorist who does not also subscribe to racism
not
being
possible.
Like if you're a queer theorist, then you're also basically a critical race theorist, and so on and so forth. There's interesting points where they don't overlap, which are very interesting. Like like there are, for example, there's Black nationalists who are very homophobic, and it's very interesting to see like Umar Johnson by any chance, Dr. Umar. He's a character, but they're like hardcore Black nationalists who are very like anti-gay and homophobic and all that shit. And when they talk to like Black Lives Matter advocates, where a lot of Black Lives Matter advocates are like, well, of course we have to include queer Black people. Like we need to center Black trans women as the the Black nationalists are like, no, fuck that. And then they're in this weird world where there's no, because you can't call the Black nationalists racist or whatever, right? You call them misogynist and patriarchal. So it's just a whole fucking.
But then they also have this argument of, you can't be a feminist and also be racist, or like you can't.
Correct.
Yeah. So if you are for one social justice movement, that ergo you are for all of them. So I can see what you mean.
That's why it's like queer theory, gender studies, all, you can't have one without the other, really. So queer theory in particular, at least their focus is to live queerly is an act of revolution. So if we can be as flamboyant as possible, and like, the extreme version of queerness is like doing kink shit at Pride, right? Like at a Pride parade or whatever. Which I think Pride parades absolutely have their place, and it certainly should be family friendly. And maybe at the nighttime version, go do whatever you want at whatever burlesque or whatever
Yeah,
club.
I
But
agree.
like the whole point of undermining the norms is like, no, we have to do this in public, because to not do it in public would be to acquiesce to the norms that say, oh,
Heteronormative. Yeah.
exactly, and all that stuff. I'm a big fan of heteronormativity, by the way.
Oh, great. Well, I want
Yeah.
to put a pin in that because I am too. And this is a lot of stuff that's impacted me personally. But I guess more broadly, what are some of the most outlandish kind of ideas you heard being discussed, while doing this course?
We were talking about oppression, as we always do. And I said something to the effect of female genital mutilation is a barbaric practice. And female genital mutilation, I don't know if you're familiar, it's like it's a
Yes. Yeah.
barbaric practice. I won't describe it, but it involves surgery on
They
female
basically remove the
genitalia.
ability to have, sexual pleasure, right?
Yeah, it's meant
Yeah.
for men to control women so they don't,
Yeah.
are not promiscuous or whatever. And it's a very
Mm-hmm.
like terrible surgery, health wise
Mm-hmm.
and other things. I said that's barbaric.
Yeah.
And a woman in my class was like, well, we have a lot of problems here in America, so I don't like, you shouldn't say those type of things or whatever. And that was sort of the vibe of the rest of the class, was like, yeah, you can't say barbaric. And I was like, what the fuck? We're in a gender studies class. I thought of all the archetypal example of patriarchy, is surgically removing, female genitalia for the purpose of male dominance. To say that's barbaric, and the reason is, well, who am I as a Western white neocolonial male to say that another culture's practices are inferior to mine? Sorry, I forgot. I will not criticize that disgusting nonsense. That
And
was
so
probably the craziest thing I've heard.
did anyone like argue it, or was it just sort of?
No. The other thing too is there were a couple people who were like your classic, just chirping raise their hand. And the thing about heteronormative patriarchy is this and that, but the majority of people in those classes just never participated. They were just there because they just took that as an elective and they just had to take a class like
Right.
that or something.
Okay.
So it's not like every single day I walked into, the clown show. Every now and then the circus was in town, but
This is what I've been imagining in my head.
yeah. And actually, to be fair, and I do want to say this, actually, one of the gender studies professors I had a great relationship with and had multiple 3-hour conversations with. He was a straight white male, so of course it was just it was just our natural unifying around oppression.
Oh, you two were just colluding in private to
Exactly.
oppress the rest of the class.
Yeah, but he was like a legitimate gender studies professor, and he had a lot of, I would say, progressive ideas, but he was very much like common sense in terms of like, yeah, I go to these academic conferences and I hear all this pretentiousness around Western society, whatever, and he said to me like, and this is coming from these people who are the most privileged people in the world, whose salaries are paid by these students who go into debt, and I'm like, fuck you, and I'm like, all right, that's fucking, this guy's for real. So there's always a part of me, anytime I'm mocking gender studies, which I do regularly and I do condone, that is like, I can't forget that no matter, you can never make blanket statements about anyone based on, oh, you have a gender studies degree, you must be this way. Gender studies, it's pretty much, you can get there like 95% of the time, but even then, there are exceptions to that. So you just got to be willing to pay if you're going to generalize, then you got to be willing to pay the price. And if you say like, yeah, everyone who gets a gender studies degree is an idiot, and then you come across someone who you genuinely are like, oh, I like this person, and then they tell you have a gender studies degree, well, now you got to be the one in the awkward position of like, damn, I just called all these people idiots, and how am I going to deal with that in this conversation? So it's not like I don't pay a price for saying all the crazy shit that I do, but sometimes collateral damage is necessary in the meme wars. So,
well, I'm certainly glad you're paying the price.
Yeah, that's fair. Someone has to.
So I think a lot of people could probably grasp the idea of questioning ideas and opinions. So, for example, oh, why do houses have four walls and a roof? Well, that's only because we've been conditioned to know that. Why do we view this as beautiful? That's only because we've been conditioned to do that. But then I think what a lot of people really struggle to grasp is how we have people genuinely debating and believing plain objective facts such as male and female, or if there's any other examples that you can give, I'd be very interested to know. So did you come across stuff like this? I'm assuming, you had Judith Butler and Anne Foster
Yeah.
Sterling and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, the again, going back to the all truth is socially constructed. It's like male and female are categories, and to categorize is to otherize, unless you're the dominant category, right? So if you're a biological male and a white, able-bodied, rich one at that, then the whole purpose of your categorization is to solidify power for yourself and to marginalize others. And obviously, like, it's not like women haven't been oppressed in history. So there's always a kernel of truth to that. But the idea that, yeah, male and female are not real things, it's just this convoluted theology of social constructionism. And again, I do think it's used. The best way to think about it is like, if you've ever gone to church and, like you have people that like, they go once a month or every couple months and they go and they say they believe, but they've never read the Bible themselves. And they just kind of nod and go, well, my pastor said this, so I believe it. It's like, that's basically how it works in gender studies, right? Like Christian
Paradigm.
theology. Yeah. Well, Christian theology is very complex. Like there is a lot of like serious academic, theological debate that goes on amongst Christians, right? And the same is true for gender studies. And they're both, in my opinion, equally, not equally. They both rely on certain things not being true about reality, like
Sure.
evolution not being real.
Yeah.
They both would reject evolution, funnily enough. But the average person just goes, well, my pastor said this, so I believe it. So like male and female, they can't really, they're not going to sit there and go, well, because of the, Foucauldian regimes of truth and what Foucault allows us to do is this and that. They're just like, look, I'm for inclusion, and inclusion
Yeah.
means expanding the category, and expanding the category means pretending the category doesn't exist to
Denying
begin with.
reality.
Yeah.
I mean, in a way, I'm really impressed by these people. And also, growing up, I never believed a word of really religion. I think I always sat there in church thinking like this stuff is so stupid or not listening at all. But I wasn't raised in a strict household. We never even really talked about it. It was just custom. So, but it does, I mean, my boyfriend was raised Mormon and he's not now. Obviously, he's kind of stopped when he was a teenager, but he was also similarly kind of asking lots of questions, but it was a lot more integral to his life, this life of being a Mormon. So he kind of had to challenge it. And I said, he described scenarios where he said, wait, but you guys say this thing and then that thing, and that contradicts each other. So how does that work? But it's just things that no one says. It's this unspoken rule. None of us utter these hypocrisies and contradictions and ask those deeper, meaningful questions. And if he did, people would say, oh, he has very wild ideas, your boy or whatever. It would just kind of brush it off. So in a way, these people impress me how they are able to stay so resolute in their echo chamber when, I guess, me as a person, as soon as I can see something that challenges what I know to be true, I don't really have difficulty going down that path. And one of the reasons why I speak about what I do is because it wasn't even that long ago, because of my experience in the queer community and wanting to be included and everything taking off on this gender train, all of a sudden, I ended down a rabbit hole of adopting lots of these ideas. And then at a job I'm at, which is corporate, there was sort of this extracurricular opportunity to lead an internal training course on, gender. And I was like, oh, this is great. Like, I'm gay and like I can be a part of this. And I suppose having come out that the other side and genuinely feeling like I have spread some harmful ideas, I feel so duped by gender studies because I feel like it's all come from there, and it has infiltrated the fact that I'm just a gay man and I'm same-sex attracted. It's infiltrated my experience to now I somehow have to believe in all of this anachronistic, let's overthrow reality. It's wild. And I don't know if I was going to follow that up with a question, but I suddenly...
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, again, it's like, I like to say I'm Christian adjacent, and that I have a think like I do think Western society is rooted in a lot of Christian values and others Greek philosophy as well. But um,
Hmm.
like the idea that like love your neighbor and act like Jesus, like those are all I would say like objectively good things, right? Like love, that's how societies flourish when forgiveness and grace and all these values are held high.
Yeah.
But if you then, but if someone takes advantage of that and says, "Oh, well, you love Jesus," well, then you love the Bible. That means you love everything the Bible says, and what the Bible says is that gay people, da 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 da. And so, like, it's not as obvious on the right, and I don't think it happens as often, but it's the same process. That's that process on the left. Like, oh, I'm for inclusion, like, of course. And I was as part of that DEI program design team. We talked about putting pronouns in our email signature at work, and I would lead roundtable discussions. And I was very people should be skeptical of this, and I don't blame them for being, but I was pretty objective in like so one of the things that we're talking about as a group is requiring people to put their pronouns in their email signature. How does everyone feel about that? And a lot of people were just like, I just don't understand the point of that. I don't mind if it's in someone else's. I don't really want to do it myself, which is more than reasonable. But no one was like, I'm not doing that, and here's why. But there were a lot of people that were just like, well, of course, if it makes someone feel better, I'll do it. Like, what's it cost to me? I don't see how this is a problem. But then it's like, okay, well, we'll put our pronouns in our email signature. Well, next we'll put our race in our email signature, as some colleges do. Or I've seen that where it's like pronoun he, him, race. And then guess what? You get on the whole intersectional train at a certain point. And
I've
it's like, at
never
what point
seen
do we
that.
stop?
Oh God. I hope that train doesn't make its way
Well,
here.
you've seen like it's pronouns and Zimzer and all that, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I clicked on your YouTube channel. It says it says a pronoun thing.
Yes.
I had it for a second as it's in my own because I couldn't. I clicked on add pronoun and then I canceled out, but I couldn't redo the changes. So I'm like, do I have to put them in? All right, I'll put it's in. And I went back, but that's hilarious. I love that. It's like it
I'm sure
highlights the absurdity of it.
if someone didn't know me and they click on my page, they immediately go, "Nope, I'm
Yeah,
not listening to
honestly.
this guy."
Well, was doing a podcast with some friends for a period of time, and under all of our like names, we had our pronouns in there. And it was like, guys, if someone comes across this podcast, you're gonna get the wrong impression on this. But we were like, fuck it, we don't care. That's gonna happen no matter what. So it's funnier to do it that way.
Those pronouns are messed up. I mean, it's funny how it's a microcosm, of queer that I only see on the internet discussing these pronouns. But then you watch, Jubilee debates where people are arguing a point and they're like, I'm not going to call someone Zim, Zer. And it's like, okay, calm down now. Like, let's talk about the they, them, because that's actually something we're dealing with every day. But you see this sort of issue with outlandish ideas from social media being weaponized for political conversations that don't really happen in day-to-day life. And if you do meet someone who says, please refer to me as it's, you would just probably distance yourself from that person quite quickly.
Yeah, well, I've yet to come across in my real life an idiots. I know teachers in the Chicago public school district who have students who go by Zimzer and Bugs. They said like at least 2 out of their 30 10 of them, I think they said like 10 or 11 out of 30 went by some alternate form of pronoun, and a couple of them literally went by Bugs or Zimzer or some shit like that. So I'm like 1 degree away from people who deal with that on a regular basis.
Okay.
It's particularly bad with like younger kids, middle schoolers and high schoolers, stuff like that.
Well, the US is definitely worse because I think the one advantage, I'm Irish, so I don't relate that much to British people, but I've lived here for 10 years. But the one good thing in that sense is English people are a lot more reserved and they're very shy. So they never want to be the center of attention. Are you American? Or?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I live in Dallas, Texas. I moved from Chicago to Dallas in the last couple of years.
You're
so I'm American. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like everyone with the ability to think is somehow moving to Texas. It's funny. One of my sisters lives in the suburbs outside Chicago, actually. So
okay, that's where I grew up. I grew up in the suburbs.
Right.
Well, maybe you can don't dox yourself, but you can tell me after.
Sure. Some of these ideas get bred in the UK but then they are so ridiculous that people don't have the confidence to actually say, I'm going to do this. So we get a lot of he theys and she theys here, like a lot. Because, and my theory on that is they can have a bit of the oppression and a bit of the, I'm not heteronormative without the commitment. Like I even did a reaction video today to this, interviewing woke students on campus, and he went to Brighton University, which is like the gay capital, LGBT capital of the UK, and he said, why are you she they? And she said, I don't know, to be honest. It's just something I'm just not like, I just don't really relate to gender that much. Like it's such little amount of thought. And I know someone too who, she introduced herself to me on a work call, and this is like a few years ago, she said, I'm a non-binary lesbian, my pronouns are she they. And I was sort of new to this game, so I genuinely was curious, and I said, oh, how can you identify as non-binary and a lesbian? Genuinely curious. And the whole call just went dead, and she just goes, I'm gonna have to think about that and get back to you.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And you just think, you are claiming this to be your identity, a very integral part to your identity, and you even kind of openly admit that you have no idea. So
Yeah.
I think that's the difference between our countries, is that same ideas, but I feel like Americans are in general a lot more confident and outgoing, so they can actually have the gumption to be like, I'm bug self.
Yeah, people have compared it to like being goth or what. It's just like a social identity, or like it's just like it's a thing. It's a subculture.
Mm-hmm.
And if I meet someone in real life who goes by they them, even if you're against that, I don't think it's a good idea to like, you're a she her and make a big deal. Like I go with whatever. I try to be polite. Now, if someone is like playing a power game of some kind, like my pronouns are they them, and you will call me that, like I'm gonna go, actually I don't believe in that. But generally speaking, like if it's that person who said like, well, why are your pronouns she they? Oh, I don't really know. I'm not gonna be like, I'm not calling you they them. Like I don't know what I do. It's all context dependent. But the reason that I do think it's important to actually like draw lines on this shit is because this shit confuses kids. That's the problem. It's like, oh well, for an adult that goes like, I'm she they, okay, well, she's probably not going to get hurt. But like if you're a kid and everyone around you is like, gender's not real, and if you like dolls, I remember there's one clip that sticks in my mind. It's some big trans YouTuber who's got like, I don't know, a couple 100,000, whose videos get like 100,000 views, where she says something like, if you are asking yourself, am I trans? The answer is, you probably are. It's like, no, you probably fucking aren't, actually. And you should probably not go down the medical route, which is being pushed on everyone, and there's an entire profit incentive behind that and all that shit. So I'm very sympathetic to the average person who's like, I don't give a shit about pronouns. Like, even people who are like against it, they're like, you care too much in the opposite direction. Like, I don't care about pronouns. I'm not like against them per se. It's like, I'm sympathetic to that. The reason I'm against the crazy shit is because you have to draw a line somewhere. And if you don't, then it leads to all this nonsense about normalizing, like, well, you were assigned your sex at birth. And with just this, $999 a month pill, we can align your body with your felt sense of sex, whatever the fuck that means. So,
but never align your mind with your body. It's always
right. Never that.
Around.
Yeah, and that's conversion therapy. They've mm-hmm. changed the words now, so that conversion therapy, which is genuinely like a bad thing. I think adults, like if you wanted to go to, I think they call it restorative therapy, or I think that's what they call it for like the Christian fundamentalists, is like, well, if you as an adult want to go to, by your own choice, go to a therapist who says they'll pray the gay away, like fine, you can have that right as an adult. Children, no fucking way. And that's exactly how I feel about gender therapy. It's like, if you're a child, under no circumstance whatsoever. Once you're an adult, even if I was against it in theory, like, the fundamental line is informed consent. Children cannot give informed consent. So that's the line I draw, and I'm not interested in debating it.
Not even with me. I'm just kidding.
I suspect you would be on my side. So
for sure.
My concern with this is the fundamental basics of how it's affecting things. It's like there's massive medical malpractice, in my opinion, going on with children. Weird shit going on with female prisons and female locker rooms and stuff like that, and female sports. That's the touch point where I think it matters. It's like, look, if you're a biological male, You just don't enter a female space like that. When you get into the, like, the Ray Blanchard autogynephilia versus the homosexual types or whatever, it's like, then my intuition is the best way we handle that when we're out in our daily society is like, you just treat every person like an individual. And if they're being goodwill, if they're not trying to, like, I am this gender and I'm a victim and I'm going to somehow use this against you, it's just like, I just feel this way. And, if you don't want to call me the pronouns, whatever, it's like, I've said this, it's like, CJ the X is, I've talked to CJ the X. He's a YouTuber who actually does a lot of great videos. He is non-binary. He's a he,
I watched one of your most recent videos, like a pronoun debate. Is that him?
Yeah, that was him. That was him. Yeah. He's great. He's like a artistic and philosophical genius, in my opinion. But why did I bring that up? Because because I said to him, like, look, I don't use they them. I just don't, I might do it for someone I don't know, but, like, I'm not gonna, especially, like, behind closed door, I'm like, refer to someone as a they when I'm just me and some other person. Like, I'm not playing that game. I'm not denying my own. I'm not putting you in a third category that's like non-human or some shit like that. Not that they them isn't human. It is definitely not human, and I'm never calling anyone it. No fucking way. But what I said to CJ was, like, the fact that you are in no way, like, trying to, like, call me they them, or, like, you're playing a victim of any kind. It's like, I'm almost incentivized to go out of my way to call you they them, just because, like, that's a respect. If that's what you genuinely want to be called, and it's not for some power dynamic thing of, like, I'm a victim and call me, I'm gender oppressed or whatever, then I'm almost like, yeah, I'll go out of my way to do that. But like, it gets, I don't know, it's complicated. It's times like these when I'm like, I can totally understand why my friends who have zero interest in politics whatsoever, they're like, Paul, you spend an hour and a half talking about pronouns and non-binary and Zimzer and stuff like that. It's like, that's because if I don't, then in 5 years, you all will be forced to put your its and sexuality pronouns in your fucking email address. And
exactly.
And then when they hear a story about it from work, they're like, thanks, Paul. Thanks for fighting the good fight, because we don't want to be doing that shit. So that's fair.
It's funny because you do kind of think it's this esoteric thing online, but I mean, I see headlines every day from the UK of this stuff affecting our country. It's like, and it's one of the major political issues. And I think this idea you had of drawing the line is something I've thought of a lot as well. But it's so difficult because it's so enmeshed with this postmodernist theory that if you then step in and say, oh, well, we can have, 10% of postmodernism, but we draw the line then, it's like Helen Joyce. I don't know if you're aware of her, but she does this analogy of, in maths, if you just change the tiniest little thing of this little equation all the way over here, then the whole thing's fucked.
Yeah.
But I could honestly talk to you forever. I can't believe how long we've been chatting, but there's kind of two more things I really wanted to dig into, if that's okay. So the first one is, do you have theories on how this queer theory, this heteronormative BS, has infiltrated the LGBT community, or what it means to be gay, even if we just start there? Because I think it's so entangled in it now that people actually don't even realize, and separating it seems to be impossible. It's like a parasite has overtaken it.
Yeah, it's because it takes advantage of people's genuine empathy. And for gay people, I think there actually is a space for empathy. Like you said, like, not, what is it, 98 or 95% of people are straight. It's like, to be nowadays, yeah, I don't think gay people face the oppression that they did in the past, like, and where they do currently in other parts of the world.
Yeah.
But, like, it is more, I think it's fair to say it is more difficult to be gay in terms of just, like, if you're straight, well, theoretically, everyone of the opposite sex is a potential partner, right? Obviously depending on attraction and their relationship status and all that. But, like, when you're gay, you're like, your options are so much smaller, right? And then also, like, it's just, I've had conversations with very left-wing gay friends who talked about, like, yeah, I would get rocks thrown at me on my way to school because of how I dressed, and I'm like, okay, that's pretty fucking lame. And so, like, the fact that people, like, people associate oppression, like, gay people have been oppressed, we should have empathy for that. It's like, that's true. And not, and sort of in a way that's unique to being gay, in the same way that, everyone can have a part of themselves that warrants being empathetic towards. But with gay people, yeah, it's like, let's be empathetic and not be oppressive. Okay, and then that's all the ideology is based on. Is like, well, we're anti-oppression, and it's so empathetic to be that way. So it just naturally capitalizes on people's feelings towards that. And it's like, of course, gay people who've been called freaks or if you grew up getting called a freak and all that, like you're going to be more sympathetic to the freaks, right? Or the queers in the academic sense, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's just a natural hijacking of empathy and the genuine desire to push back against bigotry and shit, which like kind of seem like centrists. The queer fundamentalists are as bad as the right-wing religious fundamentalists who say, being gay is going to send you to hell and all this shit. And it's just like, so
yeah,
I understand the desire for, or the impulse for people to be susceptible to that.
Yeah, you touched on many interesting points there. I think some people who don't have the gay experience, for want of a better word, they kind of think it's just about whether you were bullied or not, or actually looked down upon or not. But like I said before, if you do grow up in a small town and you are the only gay in the village, you'll typically hear of boys, all their friends were girls. Well, I think that's just because they are the closest thing that they can relate to. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they are their people that they would. And then they move to a city and they meet lots of other gay men, and it's a whole different ball game. It's like, oh, now I can really connect with you on a different level. And I'm not here to say that we can only connect with people of our same ilk, but it definitely it can affect people growing up just not having that relatability. And I think that does play into this gender dysphoria in particular, because you can only see yourself in women. So I think the empathy is a really interesting point. And also, people always say trans is different from sexuality, but in reality, it's like all the reasons people transition are sexuality motivated. It's all sexually motivated, because for homosexual men, it's motivated by their sexuality because of how they fit in society. And then for the autogynephilic men, that is a sexuality essentially. So it's actually all intertwined in that way. So they kind of go hand in hand there. But yeah,
yeah, well, and then you add to that the fact that, or the claim, which I believe, that like, psychoanalytics, like everything, your whole psyche is tied up in like your sexuality and identity and all these different things. So it's like the human mind is very, very, very complex, and yeah, and and when it manifests, it sounds like you subscribe to Blanchard's. Is it a dichotomy? It's homosexual and the autogynephile is how.
Yeah, like
Autogynephile
typology.
Yeah.
Everything I've read, like I haven't seen any legitimate study of criticism that refutes it. Besides people saying, "Oh, that's been debunked many times."
Yeah, right. Well, that's generally a sign that he's probably onto something. Interesting. I will actually need to. I've heard of. I'm familiar with that. I don't. I'm only aware of it. I don't subscribe to it because I guess I haven't thought about it. But as you talk about it, I'm more inclined to look more into it.
Well, one interesting thing about it is obviously we have these different motivations to transition, right? And people often find themselves thinking, when did this trans debate become so hostile, and why is it so intolerant to questions and debate?
Because it's a religion.
Exactly. But I think the reason why the religion is taken off is because for these autogynephilic type men, they become so deeply in love with this idea of themselves as a woman that it's like you defending your wife, you defending your husband from the rest of the world trying to attack them. And if they concede that trans women are not women, that breaks their whole bubble. It's the whole fantasy has been broken. And I don't say that from a place of judgment, because I think we need to have compassion for this disorder. Otherwise, we can never teach men how to actually deal with it. But they suffer this sort of narcissistic injury because they grow up with this deep sense of shame for having this erotic lust, no empathy, no relatability for that. That typically breeds narcissism. And then they have this whole trans community saying, no, you're actually just a woman and you've always been a woman. And then they can fully embrace this female version. So I think that's where we see all of the hostility coming originally, discrediting all these scientists. But the issue is that now it's become a civil rights movement and you have all these students on campuses adopting it. So that's my theory, I think, overall.
Yeah. And that, yeah, the point about like their whole, that's what the whole, if you deny that they're really women, then you deny the whole thing. It's sort of like Christianity. Like if you deny Jesus didn't rise from the dead, and like there's a specific verse in the Bible that Christians cite is like, no, you can't just be like, oh, I'm a cultural Christian and I like the idea. It's like, if you don't believe that Jesus rose from the dead, then the whole thing is moot. And there's a verse in the Bible that specifically refers to that. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's exactly how. Yeah, if I'm not a woman, then that means the that means the sex binary is valid. And then if that's valid, then it means that it's not oppressive. And if that's not oppressive, then well, society's not oppressive or as oppressive as I thought it was, which means there's like other explanations like, oh, maybe our ideas are shitty. And it's like, then you just unravel the whole thing, in terms of like what
and it's easier for me to feel a bit judgmental over these people, but then I just take a step back and I think, wow, they've sort of kept themselves locked in these ideas for like 20 years. So I do feel bad for them, because to question that is to question everything you've built your life around.
Yeah, what I would say is, if someone was watching who is like hardcore committed to this belief system, or really any fundamentalist belief system, and and they have any level of questioning, it's like, you don't realize how powerful you become as a convert out of it. It's like the most capable critics of bad ideas are usually the people who were very intimately ensconced them for a very long time. So it's like, that's ex-religious people and people who like switch political sides or whatever. It's a very common pattern I see, that people that I respect generally, no matter who they are people who, when they were younger, were the opposite of what they are now. And part of what gives them their wisdom is like, well, I know all of the valid, real reasons why people believe these things, not just a straw man type thing, right?
Yeah.
You become a very powerful force for good when you betray Satan's army and join God's angels, or insert whatever metaphor.
I can't claim to be that powerful, but according to your description, I would fit the category for this gender stuff, I guess.
Well, I've got absolutely no doubt that you like, well, you keep saying, I notice you keep saying like, we need to have empathy for people and compassion. It's like, I suspect you would not say that if you had not had the experience you had. And I think that I would say probably contributes to your success and to the degree that people respond to what you have to say. So,
yeah, I mean, unfortunately, sometimes I take it too far still and make a joke out of stuff because some of the ideas are so ridiculous. So, and
like then you got to be willing to, you just got to be willing to pay the price. That's the thing. We all have to pay a price. You got to just pay a price at some point.
Mm-hmm.
If you go around, if you take your whole life never saying anything that would offend anyone ever, you can do that. And those are called nice old ladies. I am not a nice old lady. I straight white male douchebag. So I will lean into that, but try to do it with a good heart.
Sounds good to me. So yeah, the last point is, and I'm sure this could be a whole conversation itself, but on ContraPoints, what would your impressions of her be as a whole? Because she strikes me as very interesting. And for anyone listening, ContraPoints is a trans YouTuber, very left, very postmodernist. I don't know if you would describe her like that, but she comes across to me as someone who's so intelligent, but then also can simultaneously have like the dumbest ideas.
Yeah, she is. So I would say Philosophy Tube is like all the way postmodern. Like Philosophy Tube scares me. Do you know who Philosophy Tube is? She's another trans.
Oh no, I thought you were just referring to like the genre.
No. There's a YouTuber called Philosophy Tube who is a transgender video essayist.
Okay, clearly not in my algorithm.
Oh yeah, interesting. Yeah, you by all means check her out. She's postmodernist as postmodernist as one gets, in my opinion. ContraPoints, I have a great deal of empathy for ContraPoints because I think she's got one foot in truth and another foot in the compassion that drives her to want to believe the parasitic ideas that come out of gender studies, which latch on to people's compassion, as I said. Like her, like I said, I was, very much influenced by Jordan Peterson's ideas. And then I watched ContraPoints' critique of Jordan Peterson, and the whole time I was like, yeah, this is fair. This is not like some, one whining about how he's a Nazi or
Hippies.
something like that. Yeah, it's actually pretty well thought out, even if I didn't agree with it all. Now that I've grown up a bit and realized that even people you strongly admire can act like total fucking morons on Twitter, which reveals just general flaws about them more broadly. If I go back and watch that ContraPoints video, I bet I'm like, damn, she's actually was more right than I probably realized at the time. So she's clearly very capable of seeing things for what they are. But I just think that, like, the end of her J.K. Rowling video, which is what I criticized, she said something like, we have to realize that the true, like, J.K. Rowling is not the devil, right? She's not this evil person or whatever. Like, it's more complicated than that. The real devil is like the Republican Party or something like that. And it was like she could have said something like the real devil is the pain and suffering that we all have, that we carry with us. Hurt people, kumbaya, something like that. But no, it was like the devil is the Republican Party and white men. It's like, okay, well, that again, I have no doubt that she has probably experienced horrifying discrimination and personal bullying from, bigoted white men. So it's like, do I blame someone for having the opinions they do? It's like, well, no, in some sense, but you still have an obligation to grow out of that. In the same way that, like, I know people who have had very negative experiences with people of a certain race. So like when they say their bigoted opinions, I'm like, okay, I'm empathetic to where that pain is coming from, but it is still not appropriate. It's still your responsibility to recognize that is not, you cannot use your personal trauma to then generalize about, an entire group of people, which is like the whole problem with maybe society more broadly, but certainly
Right.
the gender study stuff.
Yeah, I think I just find it really hard to understand how she's this ability to think critically, but then she can listen to the whole witch trials with J.K. Rowling, and then just her conclusion is, oh no, it's just blatant transphobia. That's it. And it's like, come on, like you listen to that whole podcast.
Perhaps, and we can wrap up with perhaps the most important piece of wisdom that I've ever put into a sentence. It's not my ideas, but like, the smarter you are, the easier it is to rationalize stupid ideas. And if you're very, very smart, then you can listen to a whole episode of J.K. Rowling's thing and find every little instance of like, oh, she's saying this because she's transphobic and this relates to this, and you can create this massive narrative. And that's the danger of like religious fundamentalism and conspiratorial thinking and one size all solutions. It's like, if you're very smart, then you get very good at telling that narrative in every circumstance. And ContraPoints is very smart. So it's not as difficult for me to think about like putting myself in her shoes, of like listening to that podcast armed with her very sophisticated ability to tell a narrative, because she's an artist fundamentally. I mean, those video essays are works of art more than they are, well, at least not maybe more than they are, but at least as much as they are informative, they're aesthetically sophisticated.
For sure. Yeah.
So she has that capability, and she's pointing that, unfortunately, towards, she's telling the wrong story, but she's a good storyteller. So even a good storyteller can tell the wrong story well, if that makes sense.
It's a very good point, I think.
Including to themselves.
Yes, I think, even very religious people can be super smart. So yeah, I hadn't thought of that. And definitely look into the Blanchard's typology, because according to that, she's attracted to women. So she was a straight man. She would fit into that autogynephilic category, if that's correct. But she did a whole video debunking autogynephilia, and, I can really see it for what it is now, I guess. But anyway, thank you so much, Paul. Really enjoyed this conversation. It was so great. Thank you for sharing everything about the madness of your gender studies experience. And it's just been a super great conversation. So where can people find you if they've not seen you before?
PF Jung on YouTube. PFJUNG. Jung as in Carl Jung, the psychoanalyst who Jordan Peterson references a lot.
So is that pretty fucking young, or is it is it just
I know, those are my initials. It's and it sort of sounds like PF Chang. That actually went into the, do you know PF Chang's?
No, I know it's a
Chinese. Okay, PF Chang's is a big Chinese restaurant chain here in the United States. So oftentimes I get the comment, PF Chang's? And I was like, well, there's already that real estate that PF Chang's built up in people's minds, so I just parasitized onto that. So I take advantage of their marketing.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. I'll put your link in the description. And yeah, hope you have a great rest of your day.
Cool. Thank you, Jack.